Welcome back, and thanks for tuning in to NK Cheating Story. We truly appreciate every single one of you. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. My name is Paul Carlson. For years, I lived in silence, just a name on old divorce papers, forgotten by the woman I once loved and erased from the lives of the children I never knew I had. I built a new life, far from betrayal and broken trust, or so I thought. Then one morning, a stranger walked into my office holding a photo from my past, our wedding day. That was the moment everything changed. I thought the worst was behind me. But the truth? It was only just beginning. And what I uncovered nearly destroyed the people I once called family. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee that morning when Jackie, my assistant, brought it in, lukewarm and sweetened with that artificial stuff I kept telling her I hated. I took a sip anyway, bitter, just like the mood I'd been in all week. The government had stalled again. Something about sensitive materials delaying a copyright case I needed cleared fast. Typical. Red tape, incompetence, and layers of lazy federal bureaucracy. Nothing ever got done unless a senator's name was on the email thread. Meanwhile, every day they dragged their feet, I bled money. And I was too damn old to keep playing games with systems built to protect liars. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temple. My office was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. I had deadlines, angry publishers, and a legal department breathing down my neck. But none of it could have prepared me for what happened next. Jackie poked her head into my office again. "There's a young woman out here. Says she needs to see you." Wouldn't give her name. Just handed me this. She stepped inside and placed a photo on my desk, face down. The moment I flipped it over, the breath left my lungs. It was a wedding photo. My wedding photo. Me, smiling like a damn fool, standing next to Emily, my ex-wife. On the day I thought life was just beginning. 18 years ago. Before the betrayal. Before the lies. Before everything came crashing down. I stared at the image as dread clawed its way up my spine. Why now? Why today? Most people assumed I'd moved back to lick my wounds in peace after the divorce. But the truth was, I'd built a new life. One of control, isolation, and strict boundaries. I didn't let people close. Not anymore. Not after Emily. Ask her if her name is Sarah or Sandra Press. I told Jackie, my voice low and tight. If she says yes, give her this. I slid a sealed Ziploc bag across the desk, inside, a USB drive. Show her the video. If she wants a copy, let her have it. But bring the original back to me. And, Jackie, lock the door after she leaves. Jackie nodded slowly. She could see I was shaken, and she didn't ask questions. Good girl. As the door closed behind her, I stared at that photo again. God, we looked young. Naive. In love, or something close to it. That was before I knew what real betrayal felt like. Before I learned my best friend had been sleeping with my wife while I worked dangerous assignments overseas. Before I learned the twins Emily gave birth to might not even be mine. Back then, I was an idealist. A believer. I thought honor meant something. But life had taught me better. Now, I was 42, unmarried, and uninterested in starting over. Trust wasn't given anymore. It had to be earned. And no one, had come close in nearly 2 decades. I stood at 6 feet 4 inches, 200 pounds of discipline and wariness. I kept myself in shape, 2 hours in the gym after work every day. My brown-black hair had started graying around the temples, but I still turned heads when I walked into a room. Not that I cared. Love was for suckers. Marriage? Never again. An hour passed. I figured the girl had left. I was about to ask Jackie what happened when she walked back in. Face pale, lips tight, and eyes unreadable. "She's still here," Jackie said. "And she has questions." I didn't answer right away. I just nodded once. "Bring her in." Jackie opened the door and called softly, "Sarah, you can come in now." And then I saw her. The moment she stepped into the room, my heart stopped. She couldn't have been older than 16, but something in her face. It was like staring into a mirror of my past. Her eyes, her posture, even the nervous fidget of her hands. She looked like my little sister had at that age. Sarah Press, a name I hadn't spoken aloud in years. A ghost from the life I was forced to bury. Tears welled up in her emerald eyes as she sat across from me. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Not yet. "I found an old picture in the attic," she said, voice trembling. "It had your name on the back. I Googled you. Found your old Facebook. I had to know." My throat tightened. All I could do was nod. You don't know me, she continued. But if what I found is true, then everything my sister and I believed, it's all been a lie. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, staring at this girl, this stranger, who looked like she'd fallen out of a family photo album I never got to keep. Start from the beginning, I said, my voice low. And in that moment, I knew. My past wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. She sat across from me, still trembling, still trying to summon the courage to say what she came here for. I could see it in her eyes, confusion, fear, and something else, desperation. My name is Sarah, she said quietly, brushing her dark hair behind her ear. My twin sister's name is Susan. We're 18. I froze. Twins. She had just confirmed what I had feared. The timing, the photo, her face, her voice. It was all starting to make too much sense, and none of it at the same time. She took a deep breath. I didn't know anything about you. Not until last month. I thought Thomas, my mom's husband, was our dad. But I found some papers in the attic. A photo album, a marriage certificate, divorce documents with your name on them. I Googled you, found a few old traces, and then I saw a photo of you and Mom. I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear the blood in my ears. Then Susan got sick, she whispered. Really sick. That caught my attention. How sick? I asked, leaning forward, every nerve alert. Bone marrow disease. She's been in and out of the hospital. They said we needed to be tested to find a match. So we did. And her voice cracked. And Thomas isn't our biological father. Silence. Total, deafening silence. The kind that makes your skin crawl. She insisted he was our dad, Sarah continued, her voice rising with anger. Our whole lives. She lied. She let us believe it, let him believe it. And when we needed him most, when we needed a match, she couldn't explain why none of us matched him. My fingers curled into fists on the desk. I forced myself to stay calm, but rage boiled beneath the surface. Emily. That woman had done many unforgivable things, but this wasn't just betrayal. This was neglect. Deception. She had stolen my children, then gambled their lives on a lie. Why me? I asked, my voice gravel. Sarah looked at me, searching my face. Because you're our last hope. I swallowed hard. The room felt smaller now, the air too thick to breathe. She won't admit the truth, she continued. She won't say your name. But the DNA test ruled out Thomas, and when I compared your face to mine and Susan's, I just knew. I rubbed my jaw, trying to process it all. I had spent nearly 2 decades building walls to keep the past out, and now here it was, breaking through like a flood. Where is she? I asked. Susan's in St. Luke's Hospital, downtown. She's getting weaker. The doctors said if we don't find a compatible donor soon. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I stood up suddenly, pushing back from my desk. I paced. My mind was spinning with images of a daughter I'd never met, dying in a hospital bed because of a lie I didn't even know existed. When did you find the documents? I asked. 3 weeks ago. And you came here by yourself? She nodded. I skipped school. I drove 6 hours straight in my old van. Slept in a gas station parking lot last night. I closed my eyes and exhaled sharply. That reckless determination, it felt painfully familiar. I would have done the same at her age. I had. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, her voice cracking. I didn't come here to ruin your life. I didn't know where else to go. I walked over and stood in front of her. She looked up at me, eyes glossy, jaw clenched to keep from crying again. You didn't ruin anything, I said softly. You might have saved everything. The next few minutes passed in a blur. I called Jackie back into the office and told her to clear my schedule for the day. Then I picked up the phone, dialing the private clinic we used for corporate physicals. I need a rush DNA test. Today, put it on the corporate card, and book a follow-up at St. Luke's. I'm going there tonight. Jackie raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She could read the room like no one else. Sarah stood beside me, stunned. You believe me? She asked. I turned to her, emotion tightening my throat. I don't just believe you. I can feel it. She smiled. A small, tired smile, but it was enough. For now, I didn't know what the test would say. I didn't know if I was walking into a miracle or a heartbreak. But I did know one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let another day pass without being the father I never had the chance to be. The drive to the clinic felt like I was being dragged behind time itself. Every red light an accusation, every passing car a reminder of the 18 years I'd lost. Sarah sat silently beside me, her hands in her lap, knuckles white from the pressure of how tightly she held them. I wanted to say something, anything, to calm her, but how could I? I wasn't even sure if I was her father. And yet, I already felt like one. We arrived at the private facility just after noon. Jackie had made sure the place cleared a path for us. That woman could move mountains with a phone call, and I owed her more than just a paycheck. The technician took our blood without much small talk. We signed the necessary forms, and they promised to rush the results. 2 hours. Maybe 3. That's all. But to me, it felt like I was waiting for Judgment Day. As we stepped out of the clinic, I glanced at Sarah. Lunch. She gave me a hesitant nod. We found a small diner 2 blocks away. Quiet. Nothing fancy. The kind of place where the vinyl booths squeak and the waitress knows your name if you show up twice. We ordered sandwiches, but neither of us touched them. She kept glancing at her phone like it held the answers to a life stolen from her. I kept glancing at her, seeing so much of myself in the way she bit her lip, the way she folded and unfolded her napkin nervously. "Why didn't she tell you?" she finally asked. "Because she didn't want me to know," I said flatly. "Because her father hated me." Sarah blinked. "You knew my grandfather?" "Unfortunately," I muttered, gripping my coffee cup a little too tightly. "He worked for the CIA. I was FBI. He thought I wasn't good enough for his daughter, and when she got pregnant, he made sure I didn't find out." Her eyes widened. "He framed me," I continued. "False charges. Got me fired. My entire career, gone. My reputation, shattered. I spent years trying to rebuild my life, not even knowing I had children out there." She looked stunned, lips parted, stunned into silence. "I left because I thought there was nothing left for me. Emily divorced me, and a month later, married my best friend. The same man who'd been sleeping with her behind my back. Thomas," she whispered. I nodded once. "Jesus," she breathed, shaking her head. "I had no idea." "Of course you didn't. You weren't supposed to." Right then, my phone rang. "Jackie." I snatched it up, standing abruptly, nearly knocking my untouched plate onto the floor. "Well?" I asked. "It's confirmed," she said. I didn't need her to say anything more. I closed my eyes, my heart jackhammering in my chest. "I'm her father?" "You're her father." Silence. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. For the first time in years, I was completely, utterly unguarded. Jackie's voice softened. "I'm sending the official report to the hospital now. I already contacted a litigation lawyer. The best in the state. You'll want to talk to him." I hung up, slowly lowering the phone, then turned to Sarah. Her eyes searched mine. I didn't need to say it. She already knew. She stood up from the table, trembling, and for the first time in my adult life, I pulled someone into my arms without hesitation. She hugged me like she'd been waiting for it her entire life. And God help me, I had too. We cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, trembling sobs in a corner booth of a half-empty diner on a forgotten Tuesday afternoon. After we pulled ourselves together, I paid the bill and called Jackie. She had already arranged for us to meet Susan's doctors. The report had been delivered. We had a name, a match, a fighting chance. As we drove toward the hospital, Sarah stared out the window. "She's going to be so happy," she said. Susan always wanted to know where she came from. She used to ask Mom questions all the time, and Mom would just shut her down. I stayed quiet, keeping both hands on the wheel. Every mile we drove toward that hospital was a step deeper into a life I never expected to reclaim. And still, I felt the storm building. Emily wasn't going to take this well. Thomas, even worse. I wasn't just back in the picture. I was about to blow it wide open. But this time, I wasn't scared. I wasn't alone. I had a daughter. And another one who needed me more than anyone ever had. Let the storm come. I had truth on my side. And this time, I wouldn't walk away. The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and nerves. I could hear the low beeping of machines from behind closed doors, the muffled sounds of life either clinging on or slipping away. Sarah walked beside me, her steps quick but hesitant, like she wanted to sprint ahead, but was terrified of what she might find. We'd barely spoken since we left the diner. Not because there wasn't anything to say, God knows there was, but because the weight of what we were walking into left no room for small talk. We weren't just meeting a doctor. We were about to look fate straight in the eye. A nurse met us at the reception desk. "You're Mr. Carlson?" she asked, looking between us. "I am," I said. "Room 312. She's expecting you. Expecting me. The words hit different. As we turned the corner, Sarah suddenly stopped. Her hand reached out, clutching my sleeve. She doesn't know yet, she whispered. Not about the test. Not that it's you. I nodded slowly. Then let's tell her together. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. And there she was. Susan. My daughter. My child. She looked so fragile in that hospital bed, a tangle of four lines and wires, her skin pale and thin, her lips dry. But her eyes, when they met mine, sparkled with curiosity, with something deeper, something ancestral. Recognition. Even before a word was spoken, she smiled. It was small, weak, but genuine. You must be him, she said. I am, I said, stepping closer. I'm Paul. Paul Carlson. Her eyes flicked to Sarah, then back to me. You're really our dad? I nodded. We just got the DNA results. I'm your biological father, Susan. She let out a laugh that cracked halfway through and turned into a sob. I knew it. I've always known. She just kept lying and lying. She can't lie anymore, Sarah said, coming to her side. I sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the tubes. We don't have much time, I said gently. The doctors need to move fast. They've got my blood, and my mom's, too. We're both matches. They're going to decide the best course, maybe even a dual transplant. Susan blinked. Your mom, my grandma? I smiled. She's already halfway here. And so is the rest of the family. What do you mean? I said, standing up, that when I told them I found you and Sarah, they didn't hesitate. 33 cars. My parents, my sister, her husband, cousins, friends. We're all coming. This time, you're not fighting alone. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She looked over at Sarah, who nodded through her own tears. Mom doesn't know, Susan whispered. Not yet. She still thinks we believe her lies. Well, she's in for a rude awakening, I said. And she's not going to like it. Just then, Jackie called. I stepped into the hallway to answer. They've started the media rollout, she said. The story is spreading. Anonymous author, government cover-up, a daughter's search for truth. The public is going to eat it up. Good. Let the truth bleed. As I hung up, I saw Sarah hugging Susan. And for the first time, I saw them clearly. Not just as strangers connected by DNA, but as my daughters. My girls. And I felt something I hadn't in years. Purpose. Back in the room, the nurse peeked in. There's a large group in the lobby. They're asking for you. I chuckled. That's them. Should I bring them up? Give me 5 minutes. Susan looked alarmed. Wait, they're all here. They wanted to meet you. Every last one of them. The door opened again. This time it was Barbara, my sister. She stepped in like a whirlwind, spotted Susan, and gasped. Oh my God, she whispered, walking slowly toward the bed. You look like me when I was your age. Susan blinked. Your Aunt Barbara? Barbara nodded, holding her hand to her mouth. And you're my niece. They embraced, clinging to each other as if trying to make up for lost time in a single moment. I've waited 18 years for this, I said, my voice thick. Then don't waste another second, Barbara said. The rest of the family poured in like a tidal wave of emotion. Hugs, tears, laughter between sobs. It was chaos, but it was beautiful. The past had stolen nearly 2 decades from us. But in that hospital room, we stole them back. One tear, one embrace, one moment at a time. If you asked me years ago whether I'd ever walk back into the fire, I'd have laughed in your face. I'd been burned once, scorched, humiliated, left for dead. But standing there in that hospital room, holding Susan's hand, watching my family swarm around her with love and joy, I knew exactly what I had to do. It was time to fight. Not for revenge. For justice. The moment I stepped into the hallway, Jackie was already waiting. She handed me a manila folder and nodded. The attorney's ready. He's reviewed everything. Your termination records, the fake charges, the sealed tapes from your safe. He thinks we have a monster of a case. I opened the folder and stared at the top sheet. Class action suit, parental rights violation, career sabotage, and civil conspiracy. My name was at the top. So was Emily's. Her husband, Thomas. And her father, Christopher McMillan. The man who'd orchestrated all of it. Let's do it, I said coldly. Jackie didn't flinch. We'll file in 2 jurisdictions. Civil court and family court. If the federal angle sticks, we'll take it to Washington. My pulse surged with purpose. I also sent the DNA match results to Susan's primary physician. He confirmed it with the transplant team, Between you and your mother, there's a near-perfect match. Good. That gives us leverage. Paul. Jackie hesitated. This won't be quiet. Once this hits the media, they'll come after you. Emily's family, the bureau, the whole rotten tree. I'm counting on it, I said. And I meant it. Because the truth didn't scare me anymore. We filed the lawsuits that afternoon. By 6 p.m., the story was already making headlines. Runaway daughter finds biological father. DNA test exposes 18-year lie. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, didn't matter. They all ran it. And every station had the same image. Me, standing with Sarah and Susan in the hospital, holding their hands like I should have been doing their whole lives. Emily found out the way liars always do, through panic. She barged into the hospital the next morning, lips pressed into a line, eyes wild. She didn't recognize the guard stationed outside Susan's room at first. When they blocked her path, she snapped, "I'm her mother." "Not anymore," one of the officers replied calmly. "Court order. Emergency motion signed last night. You'll need clearance to enter." Her scream echoed down the hallway. I didn't see her until later that evening. She cornered me outside the hospital cafe. "You arrogant bastard," she hissed, barely able to contain herself. "How dare you do this to us?" I turned slowly, looked her right in the eyes. "To us? Emily, you stole my daughters. Lied about their paternity. Let another man raise them. Let one of them nearly die, just to keep your lies intact. They were better off without you. Then why did one of them come searching for me?" I snapped. "Why is the other alive today? Because I showed up? You don't get to rewrite this story anymore." "I do." Her mouth trembled. For the first time in years, she looked small, defeated. "You were pregnant when we divorced," I said quietly. "You knew. You always knew." She didn't deny it. I walked away. That night, I got a call from our attorney. "We've been contacted by a federal investigator. They've opened a review into the charges that led to your termination. They're requesting the original evidence tapes." "They'll have them," I replied. "Every last one." And they did. Recordings of Emily's father bribing Thomas. A confession letter I'd kept hidden for 18 years. Copies of fake case files planted to destroy my FBI record. I gave it all up. The next morning, we received official notice. I was granted full medical authority over Susan's care. The judge ruled that Emily and Thomas had knowingly and willfully endangered a minor by withholding biological information critical to her survival. It was the first real win I'd had in years. Susan, still recovering, asked me what it meant. "It means," I told her, "that I can finally protect you the way I should have all along." Later that evening, as I stood by her bedside, she reached out and took my hand. "Dad," she whispered, voice still hoarse, "I don't know what happens next, but I'm glad you're the one fighting for me." I blinked hard against the sting in my eyes. "Me too, sweetheart," I said. "Me too." Because after 18 years of silence, my voice had finally returned. And this time, it would be heard. The morning of the surgery, I stood in front of the hospital mirror, staring at a face I barely recognized. The lines were deeper, the gray more pronounced, but it wasn't age that changed me. It was everything that had been ripped away, and everything I was finally getting back. I hadn't slept. Not really. Between strategy calls with my lawyer, a late-night debrief with federal investigators, and watching over Susan like some overprotective watchdog, rest didn't feel like an option. But when the nurse knocked on the door and said it was time, I felt ready. Susan was prepped in a private room, her frail frame hooked to machines that beeped and blinked, as if keeping her alive by willpower alone. Sarah was with her, brushing her sister's hair, whispering words only twins could understand. I stepped inside. Susan turned her head, her eyes bright despite the meds. "You sure about this, Dad?" she asked, her voice thin but steady. I smiled. Never been more sure of anything. My mother was already in pre-op. She had insisted on donating too, even argued with the doctor that she'd go first because age brings grit. The woman was steel-wrapped in pearls. The transplant team decided to do a dual procedure, one line in each of Susan's arms, each filled with marrow from her real family. A double-dose solution to give her body the best chance. As they wheeled me down the hallway, I caught a glimpse of Emily in the waiting area. She looked like a ghost, sunken eyes, shaking hands, mascara running in streaks she didn't bother to wipe away. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth had finally broken through her walls. and there was nothing left to hide behind. The operating room was cold and bright. The smell of sterile chemicals sharpened my nose. I cracked a joke about preferring whiskey to anesthesia. The nurse didn't laugh. Neither did I. When I woke up, Jackie was there, her hand in mine, eyes red-rimmed, lips pulled into a relieved smile. "You made it," she whispered. "Did she?" I croaked. Jackie nodded. "They say it went perfectly. Now it's just a matter of time." Time. After losing 18 years, a few more days didn't seem so long. Later that evening, still groggy, I insisted on seeing Susan. The nurses argued. Jackie threatened to fire them all if they stopped me. That's love for you. When I reached Susan's room, she was awake, weak, but smiling. My mother was there too, holding her hand, whispering stories from our family's past. Susan looked up at me, tears spilling freely. "You saved me," she said. "No," I replied softly. "You saved me." Sarah took pictures, one of the three of us holding hands, another of my mom kissing Susan's forehead, and one of Jackie standing by the door, arms crossed like a general, making sure the war was over. The next morning, Dr. Proctor walked in with a smile that didn't need explanation. "The marrow's taken," he said. "Her body is responding better than expected. This is a miracle. A miracle. No other word fit. We'd been bracing for the worst, but life, maybe fate, had decided to give us one more chance." Later that day, Susan asked about the news reports. She had seen the headlines, heard the whispers, and knew the world outside was beginning to understand the storm we had weathered. "I don't care what they say," she told me. "I just care that you're here." I reached into my bag and pulled out something I'd been saving. A signed, first edition copy of the book I had written under my pen name, the one that made me famous while I hid in the shadows. I handed it to her. "To the bravest girl I've ever met," I had written. "With all my love, Dad." She cried when she read it. I did too. As night fell, we sat together. Me, Susan, Sarah, Jackie, and my mother. No more secrets. No more lies. Just warmth, honesty, and a healing silence that didn't need to be filled with words. We didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, I felt hope again. I had my daughters. They had me. And against every odd, we had been given a second chance at life. The days following the transplant were a blur of cautious optimism, medical updates, and quiet, tearful moments I never thought I'd live to see. Susan's color was returning. Her eyes no longer carried the weight of death. And every time I walked into that room and saw her sitting up, talking, laughing, living, I felt like I was being stitched back together from the inside out. But while one part of my life was healing, another had begun shifting beneath my feet. It started with Jackie. She'd been by my side every step of the way, coordinating doctors, blocking reporters, calming the chaos with nothing more than a look and a clipped phone call. But now, as I watched her move around my hospital room, checking my vitals, scolding me for ignoring rest orders, I saw her differently. Not just as my assistant, not even just as my best friend, but as someone who had quietly held me together all these years, piece by piece, without ever asking for anything in return. She caught me staring at her while she adjusted my foreline. "What?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I was just thinking." I paused. "You've been through hell right alongside me, haven't you?" She smirked. "Yeah, well, I figured someone had to keep you from self-destructing." I reached out and took her hand. "Why didn't you ever say anything? About us? About what we could be?" Jackie hesitated. Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Because you were broken. And I didn't want to love someone who wasn't ready to be loved." That hit deeper than I expected. "Am I ready now?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed me. Soft, slow, no rush, no fear. It wasn't fireworks. It was peace. The kind I hadn't felt in 20 years. That night, I told my daughters. We were all gathered in Susan's room. Sarah was showing her some ridiculous TikTok. My mom was knitting in the corner, and the mood was lighter than it had been in weeks. "Girls," I said, clearing my throat, "I've got something to tell you." They both looked up, wide-eyed, like I was about to drop another life-changing secret. Honestly, at this point, who could blame them? Jackie and I, we've decided to give this a shot. Us. A real relationship. Sarah grinned immediately. "Took you long enough." Susan smiled too. I knew it. From the moment I met her. "You lit up around her, Dad." Jackie tried to play it cool. but her face turned pink as she tried to busy herself with Susan's chart. That's when Sarah said something that stopped me cold. If she makes you happy, we're behind you. Just promise us this won't go away, that you'll still be here, that we're still your family now. I walked over and wrapped them both in my arms. You're stuck with me, I said, whether you like it or not. The next morning, Jackie's kids, Tammy and Timothy, arrived at the hospital. I hadn't expected it, but they came bursting through the door like a hurricane of excitement. They'd heard everything. About the transplant. About my daughters. About us. Mom says you're going to be our stepdad, Tammy blurted. I chuckled. That's the plan, if she'll keep me. She'd be crazy not to, Timothy added. You're already more of a dad than ours ever was. Later, as I watched all 4 kids, my 2 daughters and Jackie's son and daughter, laughing together, teasing each other like siblings, something clicked inside me. A weight lifted. I didn't just have a second chance at fatherhood. I had a chance to build something even bigger. A family. That evening, as the hospital quieted, I sat with Jackie outside the cafeteria under a flickering light. I took her hand. When we get out of here, I said, I want to start over. A real home. One where all 4 kids can have their own rooms. One with space to grow. One with your name on the mortgage next to mine. She smiled, eyes glassy. Are you proposing? I shrugged. Call it whatever you want. I'm not letting you go. She kissed me again. This time, it was fireworks. I had spent so long in the shadows, letting guilt and loss define me. But now I had light. And love. And 4 reasons to never let it slip away again. We were discharged from the hospital a week later. Susan's vitals had stabilized, her strength returning faster than anyone predicted. Dr. Proctor called it a textbook miracle. I called it something else entirely, a second chance we'd bled for. But freedom didn't mean peace. Not yet. The moment we stepped out of those hospital doors, the real world greeted us like a storm front. Reporters swarmed. Microphones were shoved in our faces. Every outlet wanted a soundbite from the man who'd been robbed of fatherhood and had come back swinging, with DNA results in one hand and a lawsuit in the other. I shielded Susan and Sarah as best I could, but the headlines kept coming. FBI whistleblower discovers hidden daughters. Cheating scandal, secret contracts, and a race to save a life. From betrayal to redemption, Paul Carlson's fight for justice. And then came the twist no one saw coming, except Jackie. She walked into the living room one morning, holding a court envelope, a strange look on her face. It's from Emily, she said. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a single-page agreement, hand-signed, witnessed, and legally binding. Joint custody. She was giving it up. Not all, but enough to acknowledge the damage. Enough to let the girls decide where they belonged. I didn't know how to feel. Relief? Anger? Pity? Jackie sat beside me and placed her hand over mine. She's not doing this for you. She's doing it because she knows she already lost them. She was right. And the girls made their decision quickly. We want to move in with you and Jackie, Sarah said. We want your name. Susan nodded, her eyes locked with mine. We want to be Carlsons. That night, around the dinner table, surrounded by 4 kids, 2 by birth, 2 by fate, I realized something I hadn't dared believe in for years. This was my legacy, not the job I lost, not the betrayal, not the books I wrote in exile or the courtrooms I'd stood in alone. This, right here, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the wild energy of teenagers talking over one another. Family. We closed on a house 2 weeks later, a wide, 6-bedroom home with a barn out back and enough land for camping, barbecues, and whatever chaos the kids could dream up. Jackie found it. Of course she did. My parents cried when they saw it. My mother walked through the halls already planning furniture placement, while my father wandered the yard muttering, Now this is a Carlson home. I converted the back office into a writing studio, but this time I didn't write under a pen name. I signed every page of my new novel, Unexpected Blessings, with my real name, Paul Earl Carlson. It was a fictionalized account of everything we'd lived through. The betrayal, the search, the reunion, the miracle. I dedicated it to the daughters I never knew I had, and the love that brought them home. It became a bestseller before it even hit shelves. Susan brought the proof copy to school and showed it to her teacher. Sarah uploaded a video of me reading the dedication aloud. Within 24 hours, it had over 2 million views. But what mattered most wasn't the attention. It was what happened one quiet evening, 2 months later. We were watching a movie, something cheesy and full of explosions. Timothy had passed out on the floor with popcorn in his hair. Tammy was texting someone and pretending not to watch the kiss scene. Sarah and Susan were curled up on the couch next to Jackie and I. I was just sitting there, soaking it all in. Jackie leaned over, whispered, "They've started calling you Dad, you know. Even my two. Behind your back." I smiled, heart swelling. I was hoping they would. She took my hand. "So, when are we doing this wedding thing?" "First weekend in August," I said. "Family style? Outdoors? Big tent? No drama." "You're dreaming if you think there won't be drama." I chuckled. "As long as there's no Emily." Jackie grinned. "Amen to that." But later, as I stood outside under the stars, I thought about Emily. About what she'd lost. What she'd done. What she couldn't undo. And I felt, not anger. Not anymore. I felt pity. Because she let fear write her story. I chose love. And in doing so, I rewrote all of ours. The past didn't define me anymore. The future did. And for the first time in 20 years, it looked beautiful. Looking back on everything. The lies, the silence, the fight, the healing. I've come to understand a few things that no courtroom or DNA test could ever teach me. First, the truth always finds a way. It may take years, even decades, but it cannot be buried forever. And when it rises, it demands courage. Yours, not someone else's, to face it without flinching. Second, family isn't always about biology. It's about love, loyalty, showing up when it matters most. I missed out on 18 years of my daughter's lives, but I've learned that what you do now carries more weight than what you missed then. And finally, it's never too late. Not to forgive, not to fight, not to fall in love again, not to rebuild the life you thought was over. If you're still breathing, there's time to change your story. So if you're holding on to pain or waiting for permission to begin again, don't. The past may shape us, but it doesn't own us. I lost everything once. But by choosing truth, love, and family, I got it all back, and more.